Okay, so I'm Mark Levy. I'm the head of the English programs team at the British Council here in Spain. I know some of you quite well from the names I've seen. And it's great to see so many people. We had, I think, last time I looked, 74 people on the webinar. I hope there's going to be more. I'm speaking to you from the Sierra de Madrid. I'm in Alpedrete, where it is pouring with rain, and it's been snowing, sleeting, and raining for the last 2 days. So this is where I am, and I've rearranged my my background a little bit. I put a plant in after the trial this morning. It just looks a bit nicer. It's really good to be able to talk to you all from here. We understand that it's quite a difficult time for everybody, especially if you're teaching from home. It's very complicated. So the idea of these webinars that we've set up is to help you in any way we can through that process of getting to grips with online teaching with your learners. So as part of our response, some of you might have seen our newsletter, others might have received this information through your regional government. What we're doing is we're trying to support through webinars that we're running today, tomorrow, and Thursday initially for different age groups, where our trainer and speaker and teacher Tracey will take you through some ideas for keeping the online teaching practical, sensible, and hopefully tension-free, stress-free. That's the idea we've got behind it. So it's great if you could, those of you who've joined late, if you can tell us in the chat where you're coming from, where you're sitting at the moment. If you could tell us what age groups you teach, that would also help Tracey focus a little bit on some of the things that we're doing. On the team with me, we've got Anne Lennon and Maureen McAlinden, who are both, well, Anne can show her video for a moment. Maureen doesn't have a video on her laptop because that's the way things are. So Maureen, so we're the team who are putting this together, and Tracey, who will line up in a minute, is the. Do you want to show your face, Tracey? I can't see at the moment.
We can see. I can see Tracey.
Oh, okay.
Hi everyone.
Okay,
I can see me.
Okay. So Tracey is our trainer. Tracey, I think again, a lot of you will know Tracey. Tracey's been teaching for lots of years of teaching experience, training experience, online delivery experience. She set up the British Council's MOOC for young learners training, early years training. She's one of the people behind our Learning with Timmy program, so a lot of experience at this age range. And Tracey's going to take us through the session. So I think probably the best thing is to pass on to Tracey now. Just to remind you, if you've got any questions, write them in the chat, and Anne or Maureen and I will pick them up, and we'll ask them at certain points. Can you keep your microphones on mute and your videos off if you have the option? And we will pull together questions and ask them at certain times to Tracey.
Great.
Thanks very much, everybody. I'll turn my video off now and leave you, Tracey. Thanks.
Thank you. Just a question for those in the background, Mark, Anne and Maureen. Do we have any statistics? I'm not watching the chat, so I'm not sure what people are saying in terms of what age groups they're teaching. Did you?
106 people on the chat on the webinar at the moment. We've got everything key stage 3, early infants and primary.
Okay.
3-year-olds, 5-year-olds.
Okay, great.
Scrolling up, we've got a bit of everything.
Okay, well, as it says on the slide, we'll be looking today at early years and years 1 and 2 of primary, but some of those ideas will be adaptable if you are teaching slightly older learners, but that's okay. So I can kind of focus it on what we've decided, but if you have any questions at any point, you can just pop them in the chat and they'll be collated, and you know, if we have time to answer them at the end, we'll do that. So today's webinar is Keeping Learning Real, and I'm sure that like me, I'm still in shock of everything that's happened, and so I'm trying to find my feet, and although I've done lots of things online, it's still a very it's a steep learning curve, and I would have loved this learning curve to be under less pressure, but sometimes it's that pressure is what makes us learn. So I'm trying to stay positive about it. So I'm here to sort of talk you through some of the things I think are really important to keep in mind. And what we'll be looking at today is we'll be looking at well-being and relationships, because I think that's really important. Can I
interrupt you for a millisecond?
Yeah, sure.
Some people are saying that the sound is not good, so maybe that's just a question of speaking nearer the microphone. And those of you who can't see her, I think you just scroll through. It's not important to see Tracey, but if you want to, you just scroll through the people who are our participants till you find her.
Let me just try with my headphones, because that might make the sound quality a bit better.
Yeah. The most important thing is you see the PowerPoint, but you should be able to see Tracey if you scroll.
Yeah, you don't need to look at me. That's fine. That's fine. Let me see. Is that any better, the sound? I'm not sure. I can't hear myself, so I don't know.
It's perfect from where I am, but
okay.
I think it might depend on people.
Yeah, I mean, it's raining out here too, and that affects my internet connection for some reason. Okay, so today we'll be looking at well-being and relationships and how important that is, especially in early years and early primary. We'll be looking at realistic learning objectives for this context and what's happening now. Many of us have been asked to move our offer online, and it's thinking about, well, what is going to be achievable. And in fact, in some ways there are certain opportunities that we might not normally have. So it's finding those and looking at what we really can do in terms of objectives that are meaningful. We'll also look at some practical suggestions for meeting those objectives and sharing some ideas. Okay, so that's what we'll be looking at the end, some sharing some ideas. So if you've got some great ideas to share with us at the end, please pop them in the chat. Okay, so first of all, what I'd like to point out is that anxious children don't learn. Okay, there's a reason this is on my first slide. Anxiety prepares the body for a fight or flight response. And when the body is on high alert, cortisol can alter or shut down functions that get in the way. Okay, so children could be anxious at the moment for many, many reasons. It could be because they're in lockdown, because they miss their friends, their teacher, their grandparents, their routine has been interrupted, maybe a family member is ill. And so we have to remember that if we're being asked to give activities for the children to do at home, every family's circumstances are going to be different, and anxiety might be very high on that list of things that's happening. And so if what we're doing is making children even more anxious, then whatever we're sending home to be learnt, that will be actually counterproductive. They won't actually remember any of that. So I think it's really important for us to remember this, not to add to the stress. What we want to do is make this time, try and make it better rather than worse. So we're going to look at practical ways to sort of deal with that in a moment. But I just wanted to highlight that for me, this is really, really important, and we should always be going back to this question. Okay, so one thing that's important as well is to point out that what young children learn at school can't be replicated online. So much of what young children learn at school is through relationships with other children and with their teachers. And it's that interaction and that communication that actually helps them remember things. So things like sharing, turn taking, learning through observing others, and self-regulation. So if children are having problems sort of controlling their emotions in certain situations, that's all kind of learnt in person, and it's very, very difficult to replicate that at a distance, and basically just getting along. So there's so much of their preschool or pre-primary experience that children, that by the very fact that they're at home, they're not getting. So it's important to bear that in mind, that online learning and distance learning has its place, but it can't replace what we do every day. And digital technologies can enrich learning as well, just like blocks and watercolors can. And this is a quote from Rian Evans-Alvin: "Making connections, there's no such thing as online preschool." So that quote is kind of interesting in itself. So whilst I'm on this particular slide, I think it's important to talk about the recommendations for maximum screen time. So according to the US Department of Education, there is a difference between active and passive use of technology. So where possible, if we're recommending, it's very easy to send home a list of websites and things for children to look at. But we just need to be careful that, you know, that's not what it's all about. There's a lot more to learning in early years than watching a screen. And in fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics 2016 Media and Young Minds brief suggests that for children ages 2 to 5, that 1 hour of technology use is appropriate per day. So that includes everything. That's television, tablet, whatever. I think in these circumstances where young children are locked inside their houses and perhaps, you know, maybe living in very small spaces and with parents who are working as well, that might be difficult to contain a bit. But if there's no other way around more screen time, to make sure that it's a shared experience, so that at least it's active screen time with an adult or a parent or a sibling who is actually doing the activity or watching the screen with the child. So basically, whatever is done on screen is better shared and interactive, and that also helps. It, you know, it could be just talking about what they've watched on television, but it's that shared experience which helps the child remember anyway, and it's much more efficient. Okay, so there's also what we also need to remember, and we all know this if we teach young children, is that they learn best from interactive hands-on experiences with people they care about. Now, this is something that you as a teacher, you perhaps can't do yourself, but you can give guidance to parents and carers about how they can set certain activities up. So there's no reason why they can't continue learning in this way from interactive hands-on experiences, but they'll be doing that at home. So it's perhaps giving guidance and suggestions about what to do at home with the little ones, rather than explaining, you know, trying to replicate what's going on at school, actually using the home context where there might be lots of other things available too that you don't normally have at school. So it's sort of capitalizing on that. What are they doing? What things have they got at home that we could suggest that they do? Okay, so the difference between school and home is also important to point out. It goes on from my previous slide, is that children learn from their parents, but the relationship is different from that of a teacher. And I'm a parent myself, and I know that when I start to put my teacher hat on with my own children, they run very fast away in the opposite direction from me. So it might be a bit disconcerting, even if you're suggesting that parents take on the role of a teacher and try to replicate the school timetable. So I think it's more important to sort of capitalize on the good things, on what children are probably learning with their parents anyway, and trying to replicate that rather than trying to replicate exactly what's going on in the classroom, because as we said before, that's not possible. So it's looking at seizing the opportunity for a different way of learning and capitalizing on how they learn from or with their parents. Okay, not all children have equal access to quality education at home, and particularly at this time, what I was talking about before was, you know, this is a very unusual time as well, and you may have parents who are working on the front line, who are nurses and doctors and working at the checkout in the supermarket, who are working all the time and actually don't have the time that, you know, they need to rest before their next shift, and they won't have the energy or the time to be setting up all these activities that perhaps are coming home to be done. And so the expectation that everyone will have done the same thing whilst they've been off school is unrealistic, because there are different contexts. You might have parents with differing levels of education or confidence in terms of what they can do with their children in terms of their education. So some parents will love that opportunity. Others might feel a bit uncomfortable and not sure what to do. So I think it's about providing guidance where possible, but also understanding that those opportunities won't be the same for everybody, because it will depend on their home life. Some children could be also living through traumatic circumstances. We don't know. Not every family will have access to the same type of technology as well. So that again could affect the quality or the equal access in terms of the quality of what we can provide. I think also home and school routines will be different. So I was actually speaking to my children's head teacher yesterday, and she was saying to me that basically the parents have the ultimate say. And it's really important that, you know, the parents will need, especially in these times, these are very sort of unusual circumstances as well. Nobody has chosen to be in this situation, and so parents will need to be able to organise themselves in the way that works best for their family. So it's helpful if we can kind of send home activity ideas that are flexible and adaptable, and that can be used in an open-ended way, so that there's no pressure and stress to get certain things done. Because going back to the beginning of the presentation, if there's any pressure and stress, then all the learning is actually not very efficient or effective, and basically we are not achieving our objectives at all if children don't remember anything, or if it's creating even more stress. So I think in that last point, it's really about working with families and being aware that each family will have different circumstances, and it won't be one size fits all. So I think that's important to remember. And what I was speaking about at the beginning of the presentation of the webinar, we were talking about objectives. So as educators, what should our objectives be? And I think realistically in this situation, it would be to provide some sort of continuity, so that there is a link, especially if they're learning a language like English, where it's good for them to keep up their exposure to the language so that they don't forget. And so some sort of continuity in terms of what they, you know, that they don't forget their routines and the things that they've done at school, and have some sort of link, so that perhaps children can feel reassured that things will get back to normal. This is just a bit of a hiccup. So, and in that time we will still, you know, do things. To encourage children to keep learning, and I think this is really important. So that encouraging and keeping an open mind and curiosity and that desire to learn. I think we're quite lucky in the early years, is children are born to learn, and so it's really about our job is to try not to kill off that curiosity and wonder. So I think to encourage children to keep learning, we have to really think carefully about what we're expecting them to do, and make sure that it encourages that. And to support parents in helping their children learn. So I think that's important as well. Going back to what I was speaking about before, that it's, you know, some parents might require more support than others in doing certain things. So some of what you send home, if that's expected of you, could actually be sort of ideas for parents rather than a list of activities to do, but sort of more their approach and how to do things. Right, so how can we do that? All right. So my advice would be to, keep it simple and achievable for you, the children and the parents. Use technology as a tool to help you achieve your objectives and avoid too much screen time, like I was speaking about before. Suggest activity ideas that are meaningful, adaptable, and encourage curiosity. Okay, so those things would be, in my mind, kind of the most important things to consider in achieving those objectives. If we're talking, if we're asking children to do things that require a lot of, if they're too complicated or tricky or way above their what you would expect from them, then they won't feel a sense of achievement. And so that's why I'm saying that keep it simple and achievable, because that sense of achievement, that sense of accomplishment is very motivating. And so we want the young children to feel motivated and feel like they can do something. So in that respect, keeping it simple. So I'll give you some ideas for that, how to keep it simple, what you can do with your technology, not overloading with ideas, but a couple of simple things to just keep it real. Things like meaningful activities might seem, what does that mean, meaningful? Well, it's about having a context. So young children might not see the point of reeling off a list of words that they've been sent home to learn, but that will be much more meaningful if it's through a story or a song or something like that. Okay, so and again, what I was talking about before, having them adaptable, making them optional. I think optional is important in terms of allowing the parents to kind of decide what and when they can do. So it's important to be flexible. And then with encouraging curiosity, I think, you know, like I was saying before, it's important to keep that enthusiasm going somehow, that they want to come, when they come back to school, they'll be excited to tell you what they did or saw or learnt in English. I think using technology as a tool to help you keep your objectives as well. I think if you're new to technology, what I would suggest is just trying things that work for you and building on your own skills, and not to be overwhelmed, because it's sometimes the simplest things that are actually the most effective. I actually went to a training session this morning about some games that you can do with primary school children, and it's like, oh, they're all the same games that we do in class anyway, but they're actually, it's just making them a bit more animated on the screen. And, you know, so simple things like using a mini whiteboard that you would do in class anyway, or playing a guessing game, or, you know, all the things that you have at hand. So I think it's important not to get overwhelmed. Keep going back to what I said before, keeping it simple. This situation is unprecedented, and there's a lot of people who, you know, you may have colleagues that have lots of experience with technology, but that's because they've been doing it for a long time. And so I think we need to be realistic. They've had time to build up their skills, and you will too. So it's just about sort of taking it a step at a time. You may not find that a problem, and that's great. But for those of you who are struggling a bit with that, then I think it's really important to remember that it's baby steps for all of us. So okay, and really importantly, let's really value relationships. And I think that for me, that's underpins everything. And one thing that English can do is we can use English to stay connected. So really valuing relationships means that we're using English in a meaningful way to stay connected, okay? And I'll just share with you an anecdote from my lesson last Saturday, was that I teach a group of young learners who, and we have recently moved online, and I decided to ask them what was the most important thing for them their class, what was the most important thing, what did they like most about their class? And they all said to me that the best thing about the class was seeing their friends. And I think that's really important, to not forget just how important that social connection is. So even if you are just connecting up to say hello and check in with each other, that is providing continuity. It's not rocket science. It's really valuing and using English to say hello, how are you? Talk about some of the activities that they've been doing, but that's all relationship building, because you're showing a genuine interest in what they've been doing. So yes, I would, going on from like how we can do that, I think it's important, how can we make sure that they're staying curious and that they're staying connected and all of this. I've been talking lots about what we should do, but not actually how. So my suggestion would be to drip feed the input in short bursts, with lots of suggestions for what children can do or watch, and then some ideas for how to activate that learning. Okay, so looking at input and then activation, because I think what we tend to do is think more about the input, but actually the activation can be much more open-ended and freer, and I'll give you some ideas for how to do that. Okay, so the first thing, which you've probably all thought of, but watching cartoons. And we're very lucky that, you know, most kids have the technology where they can watch the cartoon in the original version. They can be encouraged to watch their favourite cartoon in English. And then if, for example, if there are jungle animals in the program, parents could set out toy animals afterwards. And you could also encourage parents to show interest in what their children are doing, rather than what I was mentioning before, instead of just putting them in front of a screen, actually sitting down with them and talking to them about what they're watching. It doesn't have to be very involved. It could be, oh, what's that about? What's that cartoon? Is that your favorite cartoon? Or do you know, and the parents can also ask these questions in the home language. It doesn't matter because the child is watching the program in English, but the parent doesn't need to speak English to be able to ask them about it. And if the child can answer questions about that cartoon, it means that they've understood. So that's huge. So we often underestimate children's listening skills, and actually if they've been able to follow a storyline, then that's amazing. So I think it's important to point out that but it's okay for parents. They don't need to speak English to be able to support their children. They probably might be worried about that. So that's one way you can reassure them. And just looking at this sort of, for example, talking about questions, there are sort of questioning techniques that you can encourage parents to do. So for example, they could ask closed questions. If they do speak English, instead of saying, what can you see, which is fine, they could ask, can you see a frog or a dinosaur? So that closed question gives the child two options, so they don't have to, if they don't have that linguistic resource, they can actually still answer the question and feel a bit of pride or achievement or accomplishment. Another thing to point out to parents as well is not to worry if they don't get a response. For example, if you're asking a 3-year-old, what colour is the car? They might think well, why are you asking that? Don't you know what colour the car is? It could be actually a confusing question. So I think it's a bit of trial and error, and that if we value listening and the input, so the actual watching of the cartoon, that is achieving a very important function in language learning. So I think where possible, encourage children to watch programs in English. And then in that same vein, reading or listening to stories is a similar kind of thing you can do for input. Parents and children could read or listen to a favourite story together in English. And and after the story, the child could draw a picture and label or describe it or make a related craft. And this is an example of talking about sort of open-ended and adaptable activities. So, for example, if a child is already writing, if they're in primary 1 or 2, then they could label the pictures, or they could write a short sentence about the picture. And if the children are in the pre-writing stage, when they're younger, they could just write their name on the picture, or they could just talk about it and point to things in the picture. So there's so much that you can get out of a simple picture. So it could be just, and it's open-ended, because you could get the children to draw their favorite part of the story that they liked, and that's going to be different for every child. So that's the type of thing. It's allowing a bit of choice in there, and it's open-ended. So they're the types of things that you could encourage parents to do. It's very easy to do. All you need is a story and a piece of paper and some crayons. Or for those more craftier parents, they might like to set up a craft that the children could do, or some sort of, it could be open-ended as well. They don't have to have a final product in mind. They could just let the children play around with paper and crayons and things, and have it related to the story a bit. Children could also play the role of teacher and read a story to their teddy bears or a sibling. So that's a really nice thing that you can get them to do. And then that again, that doesn't require that the parent or the sibling speak English, because the child is actually playing the role of teacher. And that's something that you could encourage parents as well. Get the children to teach them some English. That's a really useful option, and that will also help the continuity and the motivation. And in my experience, young children love playing the teacher. So one thing to point out about stories is that they, and the same for cartoons, is that they provide a context. And so it's that in that context that the learning is much deeper, because those words that are going into their little brains are going to be stuck in there, because they've got something to hang on. So it's really important to sort of give sort of suggestions where there's a clear context. And along those lines, singing and dancing to favourite songs. So we can have parents and children singing along with and doing actions to favourite songs in English. Actions help the children understand and internalise meaning, and they're also getting physical development. So getting exercise is particularly important at this time, especially if children don't have gardens that they can play and explore in. So just getting up off the sofa while you're singing a song and dancing along, that in itself is going to be helping in many different ways, not just for learning English. Okay, so they can learn English and move about at the same time. You can do two things at once. So just going to look at some ideas for those of you who might be doing some virtual classes, or that could be live, or it could be pre-recorded videos. So everyone might be being asked to do different things at this time. But I think for me, one of the most important things is to connect and say hello, just to show them, hi, I'm still here. That could be really reassuring for a child, just to see that their teacher is still out there somewhere. I remember one of the first schools I taught at, and these children were secondary age children, and they saw me out one night at the theatre, and they were laughing, and I said, why are you laughing? And they said, oh, because you're out, you know, they couldn't believe that I had a life beyond the classroom. So something very simple to remind the children that you're still here and everything's okay, that could be really reassuring. And one thing that you can do there is just to say hello with a magnifying glass. I can say hello, I can see Marta, hello Marta, and just go through all the children that you can see online, and I'm sure that will be the highlight of their day, I can tell you. So you could read a story or sing a song together in that time as well. You could even play a simple game like copy me for actions and body parts, where they have to touch your nose, touch your ears, touch your eyes. You could play things with objects like what color is it, how many, what is it, so they have to name the toys or the household objects. And you can use this time to focus on well-being, use it as an opportunity to show children how happy you are to see them. And I think that in itself will probably be far more important than any words that you're teaching them. So yes, and I think this is what I was talking about before, about having these opportunities for that you may not have available to you even in school. So using the home setting to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. And I would say one thing that comes to mind here is encouraging parents to observe their children, because that's something that they can do that's really practical. So I'm going to give you some questions here, and then I'll so does their child use English words to describe some of their toys? Do they use English expressions in imaginary play? Do they ever sing in English while they're playing? Now, you could send these things home and parents might just say no, 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 and that's okay. It's fine. Go back to the input. These are things I think that parents can look out for, and I know that this has happened in some of our British Council classes, that parents actually hear their children playing in English with their toys because they've been reading a story about that, or they've been doing something in class related to those toys, and the English just comes out. Now, what I would say is that if they don't say anything in English, it doesn't mean they haven't learnt anything. That's absolutely fine. They're still in the input stage and they're still processing things. But if they do use English in context and spontaneously, then you have hit the jackpot, really. So it's really important for parents to share that with you if that is happening, because the children might not even do that in front of you. So you've got actually an opportunity, because in this case, in these classes, the children perhaps they weren't using English during their classes, but at home they were. So this is an opportunity to get parents to share with you the things that they observe. And something else that parents could do, which is really useful, is they could keep a diary of the different activities they did together in English, or they could take photographs of the different things that they did, and then when the children are back at school, the parents could share this with the child's teacher, and that's a really nice way of keeping the connection and sort of, keeping that continuity between what happened when we weren't allowed to leave the house, and this is now we're back at school and this is what we did, and giving them an opportunity to talk about some of the things that they did, and then you can feed in the language once you're back in class. But wouldn't it be great to have photographs that you can actually talk about together in circle time when you're back at school?
Tracey, can I just join in here?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, this just brings up a question which I now asked much earlier, which was, once back to school, will we have to talk about coronavirus and confinement? And I think I don't know if you want to say that's a little bit what you were just saying. So maybe
I think so. I think it's a bit like the elephant in the room, isn't it? I think it's important to acknowledge the fears that some children may have. They might not do that in English, but definitely I think it's important to sort of make it okay to talk about how they were feeling. I think, with my own children, I've said to them, if you're scared about anything, just tell me. And, I might not have the answer, but sometimes just talking about it can help. And I think, just being honest with the children that you don't have the answer. Yes, that was a terrible thing, but I think, I think not talking about it could potentially be worse. I don't think, being overly dramatic, or I'm sure you wouldn't do that anyway, but spending too long and obsessing about it isn't good either. But I do think it's important to acknowledge the children's feelings, and I'm talking about this from a teacher's point of view. I'm not a psychologist, and I just think that for me would be what I would do as a human being, to sort of make sure that that they know that they can talk to me about that. So yeah, I don't know if that's answered the question, Mark.
I think so. I mean, I think it's, as you say, it's reacting as a human being and also as a parent. I mean, I'm
Yes.
sure people who are here on the webinar are parents, and as you would with your own kids, I mean, I think that's definitely the case.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a good question. I mean, this whole webinar's kind of in reaction to what's going on too, isn't it? It's sort of, it's a really unprecedented time for all of us, and I think we're all finding our feet, but I don't think it can hurt to be sort of honest or transparent. So yeah. And were there any other questions coming through, Mark? Because I've just been kind of going on and on without...
No. I mean, there's a couple of questions that aren't. I mean, I think keep going. There's a question about being a good English teacher. There's a few other things, but I think at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this might help. I've got all the things that I was talking about before. We've got further links and resources. So there's some great. These are sort of my top tips on what you can do with your, with what you could send home as like quality links to stories and cartoons that, are all child friendly and educational. You can take a photo of that screen if you like, and you may have already seen some of these things, and you might want to, you might have some other things that you want to share with us. But yeah, basically that's sort of to support, if you're looking around for ideas on what you could actually send home, and then some advice to parents on how to exploit that. So I think, it's important that we don't give the message that it's all about the screen and watching the technology, that you can then move away from the technology part and the input part and activate it through, toys and games and playing and arts and crafts and things like that. So, Mark, the next slide is really basically asking people to share their ideas, but have there been any questions that you think we should answer before we do that? Or, can I move on to the next?
Yeah, nothing that I've picked up that's particularly relevant to what we're talking about at the moment.
Yeah.
Have you picked up anything that I might have missed?
I think you're good to go on, Tracey, and perhaps people.
Okay. All right. Well, the next, basically, it would be useful if you could perhaps tell us, if you've got any activity ideas that have worked well in this context or in the last week, things that you might have done or been asked to do that have worked well in this very unusual situation that we're all in, or if you've got any questions, I suppose, about the things that I've been saying. But basically, if you have any comments or questions or activity ideas, if you just put them in the comments, and I'll get Mark and Anne and Maureen to tell me if there's any.
There's a few things coming in. Some of them are, in fact, there's so many I can't get you out my screen.
Yeah. No, it's a bit overwhelming, isn't it? A lot of people.
Maru has suggested there's a site called Games to Learn, which other people will see from here.
Okay. Yep.
Some are saying they've had, this is quite interesting maybe. So Pat3, and I think somebody else has said they've had no feedback from parents. Anything that you might suggest to parents to respond? Well,
that's really interesting, because as a parent, I was thinking the same about my children's teachers. It's like there's something, I think it can't hurt to reach out to parents, and they might not be used to being asked for feedback as well. So I think, like I said, everybody's kind of learning, but I think in any way that you can encourage that feedback and dialogue is a really good thing. So it could be a question of just persisting and saying, how's it going? Especially if that's something that you've tried to do and they haven't responded. It could be that parents are just exhausted, and like I mentioned before, some people have jobs that are crucial, they're the frontline services, and they may not even have time to open their emails. So every situation is going to be different, but definitely I would insist on kind of trying to make those connections. I don't know what you think about that, Mark, but so.
Yeah, no, I mean, oops, yes, I'm on. Yeah, I think that was on mute, sorry. I think the same. I think anything you can encourage, I mean, there might be a million reasons. I think the other thing is sometimes to put yourself in the parents' shoes. There may be a million reasons they can't interact at the moment.
Exactly, yeah.
Mind.
But it is a good, it's encouraging that you want to connect, I think. So I definitely wouldn't discourage that.
Yeah, exactly. But I think anything that we can do to show them that we're ready to engage is good. I think you have to accept they may have an ill parent as well. I mean, there could be
loads of things going on. Yeah.
We've got a whole load of ideas coming in. From Victoria suggested a video recipe that the parents. Great. Do you do recipes, Tracey?
Yeah, we do cook. My husband's a chef, so he gets to sort of do the cooking lessons. But my kids love cooking anyway, so yeah, it's a great family activity, and you can get so much out of cooking. You can get like measurements and numbers. You're doing a whole maths and art and science and literacy all in the one activity. It's brilliant. So definitely recipes are the way to go.
Okay, there's a few things that are very specific. Somebody's asked, I've lost it now, whether we can share the presentation. We'll look into that. I'm not quite sure where we share it, but we'll maybe on the site, Maureen, where we calculate everything.
Yeah, I mean, the actual recording of the webinar will be on a British Council Spain YouTube channel. And we can probably share the presentation on any one of our sites. So the British Council, well, we're coming on to it in a minute, but on the last slide, we've set up a page which is specifically for this period where we're in the health emergency and people can't leave home. So we're putting all of our sort of new materials, relevant materials on the one page, but we'll share that screen with you in a minute.
Okay. Yep. And also I think maybe at the end, we can just go back, if you want to take a screenshot, we can just go back to that slide.
Yes.
Now, while we're on about this. And then if people use your camera phone or whatever, you can take a slideshot of the photo of this thing anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Maggie said that the Dad Lab on YouTube is good. It sounds like something I need.
Yeah. Yes.
The links we said. Okay, some very specific questions here that maybe more. Thelia's asked, how do we deal with children who don't have the technological resources? I'm guessing, Celia, that you mean people who can't connect at all? Is that the
Yeah, I'd say so. It really, I mean, I think we've just got to scramble around for what do we have available and how can we best use that. So that could be a telephone call, you know, it could be, it also has to, you know, be workable. But I mean, I get emails from my children's teachers every day with activities that they can do. But yeah, so I think I guess it depends on really what they have available. But you know, it's difficult. That's what we were talking about before, about that access not being equal for everybody, because it really, I mean, in my own case, and it's not a big deal because we've got around it, but you know, because of the situation, I can't find one of the iPads, and so we're just sharing the one iPad around the class. And you know, I don't know what we've done with it, but you know, if we'd been prepared, I've probably left it at work or something, but if we'd been prepared, then we could have made sure that we had all of the resources. So I think there's the double thing, isn't there? It's who parents might not have that technology anyway, or it could be that they just haven't had time to organize anything. People's internet connection can be unstable as well, so there could be all sorts of things going on. But I think just try and imagine, what did we do before technology? We still could talk to parents, so you know, find a way to get in touch and see what's going on, I think.
And perhaps if you're sending emails, you could just include a photo.
Yeah.
Just to say hi, you know, a photo where you're waving or something.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of going back to basics, isn't it? But it even just like with the email, having a little message in there that, you know, could be maybe an audio or something, I don't know, as well, or a photo, as you said. That's even simpler. Yeah. So
there's lots of lots of things being shared. I'm not going to read them all out because they're mainly for each other. So you can all have a look. If you're not on the chat, there are lots of things that are being.
Are they, Mark? Are they share the ideas being shared? Is it links or are they actually activity ideas for people to do?
Some activities. Martha
Mix.
says that they send activity sheets to be traced or coloured in order to help remember vocabulary.
Mark, there's an interesting link. There's an interesting link from Alberto for children with special needs to sites, which is something that is, you know, it's a whole other area that we have to consider for people home. So thank you, Alberto, for those links.
That's great. And that fits in really nicely with the idea of things being flexible and adaptable and, you know, open-ended so that it's inclusive as well. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant one. Just looking to see if anybody's actually got an actual question to share with us, as opposed to the links. There's some brilliant links here. I hope you're all taking these down. Well, Jesus says that in Tres Cantos, the Ayuntamiento is lending computers to students without resources, which is brilliant. We're probably worth checking at your local council. Somebody, I've lost it, said, why don't you get them to do something with toilet rolls, because everybody seems to have an awful lot of those.
Great advice.
Idea. Whoever said that, that's well done.
We've got somebody raising their hand, Teresa.
Can't find her to unmute her. Teresa, if you can unmute yourself to ask, otherwise write it. Rossi, that was you with the toilet roll. Thanks, Rossi.
There is a lot of things you can do with the toilet roll too. There's so many. One thing that we've played in class is like an imaginary game. So the toilet roll has to be different things, and you just pass it round, and you might say a pencil pot so it could be like, who's got the best idea for what to use the toilet roll for? So that's brilliant.
Brilliant. Yep, Julie's point, which backs up what you've been saying, Tracey, that reflecting on the fact that everybody, we're in a hyper-productive, hyperactive society, which is reflecting on that itself and not feeling guilty if we don't do everything every day. And I think that's very important.
Absolutely. I think
that's important.
I think taking that pressure off teachers, parents and children at this time is really important. So it's great if kids want to engage and do all the activities, but to just sort of think, well, actually sometimes less is more. So, yeah.
Okay, Sarah's asked, and I think less is more, that's a really, really important. Again, as you've said, as Julie said and others have said, the human contact, especially with this age range, but with all, is what's especially important. It's not activities to fill their time. It's the things we've been talking about here.
Yeah, it's the connection.
Question. That's a very good question. I'm just wondering how we can answer it. Sarah said, is there any way we can compile all of these ideas and then resend them out? Is there, we'll save, the chat gets saved in the recording, I believe, so we can go through it.
What we can do then is, if we save the chat, we can go through the chat and just add a slide onto the presentation. How does that sound?
Oh, excellent.
And that means
sounds
that
like a good idea.
when the presentation is available for download on our website, then we're adding that slide in there. Okay. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Carly May said that they've got a 4-year-old at home. They hide objects in the house and ask her to describe them in English.
Great, that's brilliant. That's exactly the type of thing.
Fantastic.
As teachers, Sarah, you might even get ideas from the parents when they come back of what you could do in class.
Brilliant. There's some fantastic ideas that are being shared here. It's fantastic. Shall we just, I think, we will try and save a lot of these materials. If you move on to the last slide.
Yep, sure. There you go.
And I'll come back in, I think.
Yep.
If I can mute my video. Am I on? I can't see myself at the moment.
I think so. It's getting there.
Yep, we can see you.
Excellent.
We can see you.
Okay, so on this last slide, see, we've just got a few places for you to keep in touch, and partly also that we can share some of the things from this this webinar with you. So you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on the Teach English site on the British Council webpage where we have, as Maureen said before, a special central point where we are compiling everything that's connected with the Quédate en Casa and the various sorts of support that we're offering. Some of those are ours, some of we're compiling externally, but we're looking to support teachers. Some of them are cultural things about arts exhibitions that are online. There's a whole variety of things there, which we hope will help teachers and help other people in this, particularly difficult moment for everybody. As Tracey said in her chat, that none of us knew this was coming, although maybe we should have done, which is another story.
Next time we'll be prepared.
Exactly. But none of us did. And so we're all trying to make the best of it as we can. I mean, what we're doing at the moment, those of you who have friends who are also working in primary and secondary, we're repeating similar focus, but obviously different activities tomorrow for primary, later ages of primary, and on Thursday for secondary school teachers. And this is part of our idea of helping people take a more realistic and a less stressful approach to teaching in this particular moment. And so, you're very welcome to come back if you've got other ages you teach and to tell other people. Otherwise, and then when we come back after Semana Santa, we may have, we're hoping to have other things that we can offer. There may be webinars, there might be talleres. We're looking to see what we can add. There's our newsletter as well that some of you receive, and I think you can sign up for that on the web page. Is that right, Maureen?
Yeah. British Council web page, yeah. On
the web page. So really, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you especially to Tracey for putting this together for us and running this session for us. I think it's been really, really useful. I hope you felt the same. Thank you to everybody who's joined in. We had at one point, the number I noticed was 160 people. So that's fantastic. So thank you all very, very much from joining from all over Spain and beyond Spain. We've had a couple of people at least. And everybody, I think the most important thing is stay well and stay safe and look after yourselves, look after your families, and look after everybody else in this teaching community as well. And we'll try and share as much with you as we can from now on. So thanks, everybody. Stay safe.